Hello again. Welcome on behalf of the Ancient Tree Forum to another webinar in the series covering the Vet Cert standard at practicing level. This session will cover Unit 2, which is the development and ageing of trees, the role of physiological function and dysfunction. Please remember to make a note of any questions that you might have as you go along, when you can ask those in one of the live question and answer sessions that complement this pre-recorded webinar. So Unit 2, as I've said, covers the development and ageing of trees, the role of physiological function and dysfunction. And that's split into 3 subsections: describe how trees grow, describe the ageing process in trees and why they can live so long, describe the impacts that damage has on a tree. And we'll go through each of those in turn. So describe how trees grow. Describe the structural and functional characteristics of trees that allow them to grow indefinitely. And this is this thing about indeterminate growth. This is often something that we don't discuss in relation to trees, but the fact that trees can continue, unlike humans, can continue to produce shoots and roots and branches. They do not have a fixed lifespan, so in theory they could actually live forever. And that tree structures are interchangeable and replaceable, so they don't have vital organs like we do. And the fact that a tree can recycle itself and also renew itself. It has all of these features and characteristics as well, the latent and adventitious buds, for example, epicormic growth. All of these are factors which allow trees to grow and to respond to their environment, which in essence would allow them to grow indefinitely. Parts of the tree may also die and parts may replace it. They often have functional units, and we'll also cover that point as well a bit later. And that trees have developed all of these different strategies over time, over a very, very long evolutionary period of time. And that's something that we would expect you to at least have an understanding of. Then in relation to the factors that affect how trees grow, and specifically thinking about veteran trees. Now they have, of course, their genetic blueprint, but environmental factors play a role, of course, as well as historic management. So the tree growth is this kind of equilibrium between the genetic blueprint, and the tree is trying to implement this in relation to external factors. And the sorts of environmental factors that we would expect you to show an awareness of that has an impact on veteran trees are soil, climate, exposure, shade, sun, for example, wind, interaction with other organisms, and particularly, I suppose we're thinking in this context about fungi, and also management history. Has there been pollarding in the past? Has the tree continued to be pollarded, or has it lapsed? All of those things have a factor to play in how the trees grow. Then we would expect you to have an understanding about the ageing process, that the different aspects of this, that the trees have apical dominance. What happens when apical dominance is no longer in the kind of the upper part of the crown? Reiteration and retrenchment, and that this is potentially a cyclical process. So this is what we would expect you to understand, that this aging process in a crown and in different parts of the tree. So the tree may in essence be in different phases of development at different parts of the crown and different parts of the tree. And these different aspects of reiteration and retrenchment are very important to be able to understand and describe and recognise in the field. That a tree may respond to stress, it may have epicormic growth, and all of those things are a part of the process that trees go through, and that they may be in response to stress, but they may also be in response to age. Just an illustration here from one of the tree architecture articles that's been written about this, about how it's not a straight line, that trees rarely go from germination, maturity to death. There's very often some kind of side route on the way, and those are the trees that we're often interested in when we're working on veteran trees. So then we expect you to show an awareness of the resilience and survival strategies by which veteran trees can reach great age. And that's to show an awareness of the fact that we're working with those sorts of strategies rather than against them. So some examples of that would be the architectural changes in the crown, the fact that a crown may be completely made up of epicormic shoots, for example, and that adventitious roots may form a part of the tree inside a hollow stem, for example. So those are some of the examples of that resilience and those survival strategies by which veteran trees can help them reach a great age. So adventitious roots, making use of the broken down heartwood that fungi have decayed. Functional units I've already mentioned once already, and that as a practicing vet cert specialist, we would expect you to show an awareness of these, and that may well also have an impact on how the trees should be managed. So the fact that functional units mean that where you have a tree in several different parts, and they in essence have their own roots, trunk and crown, and they may actually function independently of one another, which potentially also means that the management that's appropriate for those functional units may be different, even if in essence it's still part of the same tree, or has at least been part of the same tree. There's very good examples of this. They call them colony trees in France, for example, through the tree architecture model, where you have different elements and it forms one bigger tree with lots of separate units. This is a very good example of a tree which has got probably two at least, or possibly even three separate functional units. This one here and this one here are the two main ones, but there is actually a third one here which potentially has this branch here. And in fact, how they've been managed is also slightly different in this particular case. Then the third part of this is about describing the impacts that damage has on a tree, and that's divided into a couple of sections. So this is kind of about including cutting, so pruning. We understand that pruning is a kind of form of damage on a tree. It's about the entry of air, the creation of air bubbles inside, and decay. That can be the consequence of work, and that how much you cut off of a tree, and larger pruning wounds should be avoided, but sometimes in veteran tree work, larger wounds may in fact be the right thing to do for various reasons, but understanding that what the impact of that might be is important. We need you to be able to show an awareness of the main defence mechanisms of the tree following stress or injury, and the fact that there's active and passive defences, and that those vary between tree species. Now, we wouldn't expect a practitioner to be able to know the full details of the variability between tree species, but that there is a variability between tree species. If we think of active and passive defence being an example would be thick and coarse bark, low oxygen content of sapwood, which actually prevent the development of decay fungi. Active defence may be some of the kind of parts of compartmentalization, and the fact there's resin in some trees as well, which helps to deal with some of these the impact of stress or injury. And then the variability between species, it's thinking about the difference between oak and birch, for example, in terms of heartwood and ripewood and their ability to respond following pruning. So we've already mentioned this a little bit, the awareness of the different characteristics of tree species, but relating to damage and decay. So the difference in wood properties. So with oak having heartwood, which is also very decay resistant because it contains resins and other chemical compounds, which actually hinders the development of decay, in comparison with beech, which has ripewood, and that those two differences in wood properties have an impact on the development of decay. And also, in a sense, have a difference in how resilient they are. Ring porous versus diffuse porous, and this kind of whether the sapwood has high levels of decay resistance as well also varies. So that we would expect you to be able to show an awareness of these different characteristics, and perhaps also to name a few of the sorts of differences that you might expect to see between tree species. So then finally, just a few of the resources that relate to this particular topic. So David Lonsdale has written a nice little article in the Arboricultural Journal a few years ago about the recognition of functional units, and in particular in reference to veteran trees. Then there's work of Christophe Trenou, which is sadly in French, but there's some lovely illustrations, and for those of you who do speak French, then that's great. David Lonsdale's book in chapter 4, where tree work assessment of requirements is a useful chapter in relation to this particular unit. So next time we'll cover Unit 3, which is the roots of veteran trees and the soil environment. And as I said at the beginning, if you've got any questions or any queries, please make a note of those and bring them to the complimentary live question and answer sessions. Okay, thank you very much. See you next time.